those 4 areas. And as you can see, opening remarks, the budget, the briefing, and some Q&A. Thank you. Andrew, next slide, please. Next slide. Lovely. So really what I want to do is set the background to the budget. And obviously, I don't need to tell anyone about the impact COVID has had on us, on the ongoing challenges. And if I could just say, and I think Andrew's going to come on to a bit later, when the government said spend what you need to keep the residents of Newham safe, they didn't quite make their promise. And the government still owes us £9 million. And also, in terms of the government financial settlement, the government has not really told us in the sort of medium to longer term how much money we're going to get. So we're looking at a 1-year budget rather than a medium-term budget, because the government has simply not told us how much money we've got. And that's just the government side. In terms of uncertainties, I'm sure people are following the general economic situation, and especially inflation is now at 5%. This time last year, the government told us to plan for 2% inflation. So in less than a year, the inflation's gone up by 3%. And that's just baseline inflation. As some of you may or might not know, things like adults and social care have a higher inflation rate than actually 5%. So you can see some of the uncertainties which we're managing. But also, I just want to really say what we've tended to do, and the mayor has been really hot on this, and cabinet members and councillors, is looking at those residents who are really in need. And if I can summarise, you know, children's social care is the main area, providing accommodation, especially temporary accommodation, and also something which has really become a much more a bigger challenge is families with no recourse to public funds. Yeah, so our key focus is protecting those residents in these challenging times, but also it is about still delivering on our priorities to you as a council, and investing in services and making sure we've got service provision. Now, it is challenging and it is tight situation out there, but as you can see when we take you through, we're still continuing to invest in our services in these challenging times, and also to try and get value for money. Next slide, please. So just to recap, really to where we are. And these are the previous budgets which have come before. And really, I think it's really useful to remind ourselves what we've done. We've actually reset the corporate plan to have a real focus on key services. We've extended the council tax reduction scheme, and just to really summarise what that is, obviously we all, pay our council tax. Now, one of the first things we did in the first year was to extend the support we give to residents. So if certain families and certain households, depending on their situation, can claim up to a 90% reduction in their council tax, depending on their situation. So that help is available. And we just checked it before the meeting, but we spend approximately £25 million a year on council tax support for those residents who have got, tough financial situations. And also on London Living Wage, one of the key things we did, there are approximately 700 care workers who are employed, so delivering services for our residents. And we made sure we paid them the London Living Wage. And that is, for our contract division. And that was in that first year. And under the second year, you can see some of the things we did there. And also want to pay tribute to Councillor Zulfikar Ali and the rough sleeping team. That continued investment in rough sleeping, I think, has made a dramatic difference. As you know, I'm a councillor in Stratford, and I'm sure all of us have seen the situation has been radically improved, and we made that investment there. And as you go into last year, when COVID became to bite, about £26 million COVID cost us. Government has not given us all that money. And obviously it's been challenging. We've had to use some of our reserves, and there's a plan to build back on those reserves. But also what we've done is to keep a focus, to really protect those key services. And we're just listing them out there. libraries, bin collections, and Eat for Free. But and all that has been underpinned by better financial governance, making sure we follow the rules better, our investments are not risky, and it's really important that we recap. Next slide, please. I'll just counter through these because obviously you can read quicker than I can speak. Just to show you, just remind us of what we've done. Next slide, please. Again, I mentioned about the rough sleeping homelessness. Also, that includes even in the last financial year, we now have an assessment centre for our rough sleepers in Lady Margaret Seymour House in Plaistow, and various other initiatives we've done there. And obviously, more importantly, we've made moves to address the climate emergency. And that's about reorientating, you know, how we spend money, what we do, and how we do it. And obviously, as we know, a long-term strategic thing, and also the extra £500,000 on street cleaning. Next slide, please. Again, so these are the additional coming up to currently where we are now, looking up to the next year. And I really, there's a proposal to put an extra £3.8 million more into children's social care, an additional £1 million to support those vulnerable families with no recourse to public funds, an additional £1 million for temporary accommodation, and making some capital investment to tackle climate change. And that's coming up to date. Before I spoke about what we've done in the past, that's bringing it up to date. I remember what I said in one of the opening slides, you know, we're keen to make sure, you know, tackle frontline services and to support our residents in these challenging times. Okay, next slide, please. And again, you know, looking forward, what we're continuing to do, Eat for Free, which is a commitment. It's roughly worth £500 per primary child, which is very important in these challenging times again. The London Living Wage, we continue to improve and increase our footprint in that area and make a fundamental difference to our residents and in where we can and have that influences. And really more importantly, you know, to build 1,000 new generally affordable homes. We do have a housing crisis, but as you can see, I'm sure many of us, you know, if you look around us, there's homes being built, and obviously generally affordable homes. Okay, next slide. Now, that's enough from me, and I'm going to hand over to the Mayor.
Thank you very much, Terry, and really pleased to see so many of you here joining us tonight, and I'm really keen that we can get on to questions that you'll have about the budget position and the budget proposals that we're consulting residents on, and also engaging with really important conversations with councillors here at the council, because as Terry attested, it's been a really tough last couple of years. The impact of COVID-19 is not underestimated on part of our response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and this slide just shows an overview or provides a snapshot of a range of things we've done, but it's not the full gamut of what we've done throughout the last 2 years. And as we enter into year 3 of COVID-19, we know that the financial pressures and the impact of COVID-19 will have a significant implication with regards to what we do as a council under this administration to continue supporting our families and our residents in this borough that are going through hard times for all the broader economic context issues that Terry outlined in some of his introductory remarks. I also want to really touch on some aspects of what he's presented with regards to the things that we have been investing on, and he's drawn out some key highlights, but again, it's not representative of the significant investments that we're making. For example, in housing, he illustrated the work and investment that we're progressing with regards to the 1,000 homes at social rent levels, and that's coupled with investments that we're making across a whole range of different estate regeneration restoration schemes in Canning Town, Custom House, and most recently the ballot that was approved by residents on the Carpenters estate, alongside the wider programme of remedial works that we're undertaking across the entirety of the council's 16,000 council home stock. We are in total investing some £2 billion in housing delivery, including acquisitions as part of our response to the housing crisis and the pressures that our people face. We've made significant investments in a whole range of support services, including our service area called Al Newham, which supports residents, ensuring that they are maximising and optimising the benefits that they are entitled to. We have a tenants' rights unit, which is supporting the vast majority of our residents whom live in the private rented sector against the vagaries of the private rented sector, and in particular rogue landlords. We've got an employment rights hub that we're investing in to make sure that our residents, especially during these uncertain times, are supported in advocating their rights in the workplace, and through our partnership work with the voluntary and community and faith sector, the significant work that we're doing through the Newham Food Alliance and the Newham Welfare Alliance, which builds on the work that we did in the early phase of COVID-19 pandemic, where we established Help Newham, which then evolved into Well Newham, and now the Newham Food Alliance. You'll note that in the context of the position that we find ourselves in, the COVID-19 financial pressures have really compounded a very challenged period for local government generally over the best part of the last 10 years of austerity. The constraints placed on local authorities has been huge and significant, and in the context of a borough like Newham, where we know because of the community characteristic and profile, we have amongst the highest levels of deprivation, poverty, inequality, and that's the reason why from the outset, way back in 2018, we embarked on an ambitious community wealth building and inclusive economy agenda, which is decidedly and unashamedly about addressing poverty and inequality through a whole series of strategies which currently manifest in our Towards a Better Newham recovery strategy. That focus in addressing inequality, both structural as well as economic, social and health inequality, will continue through the budget proposals that we're talking through with you this evening, and we'll be discussing with a wide range of stakeholders, including councillors. I'll pause there and I will pass back to Terry.
Right, okay, next slide please, Andrew. Okay, so in terms of, I think one of the key things we wanted to do is just to explain, you know, in terms of our support to our residents, you know, what is it we've been doing? And you can see in the top left, you know, 1.7 million has been maximised through benefit entitlement. That's for our Newham service. And this is a service designed to help our residents, you know, make sure they get the benefits which they're entitled to, as you can see, employment rights and money management. And I think in these sort of, I keep using the word challenging, but they are, you know, you can see some of the direct support and direct help we've done for our residents. And some of you may have seen it, it's in Stratford, just by the Broadway, opposite Morrison's. That's where the team are based. As you can see there's some quite good outcomes. And behind each of those numbers is a family, is a Newham resident, and often it might be our neighbour, you know, but you can see we're providing help, you know, where we can, and to sort of plug the gap and to be an advocate for our residents. Next slide, please, Andrew. Okay, now over to Andrew Ward, as it says there, the Senior Director for Finance and Transformation. And what Andrew's going to do is just take you through some of the numbers so that you see what's behind it. And this is a very short overview. Andrew.
Thank you very much, Councillor. So what I wanted to do was just talk about what the budget is comprised of and how it's funded, and then outline some of the changes that we're going to make from one year to the next when we're setting the budget for 22-23. So this slide there, we've got a list of various services and the amounts that the council ends up spending on those service areas, and it's really just designed to give an idea of the sort of the breadth and the scale of what the council does, and in some respects I'd just like to pick out a couple of those there. So the council is responsible for administering the dedicated schools grant, which is worth all of around about £450 million. That's a grant separate to some of the slides I'll show you in a minute, which are all about the council's sort of net budget requirement, but it's still responsible, I'd like to make that point, still responsible for administering the schools grant there. We've got a figure of £20 million next to housing. That's the temporary accommodation budget in them. It doesn't include what's known as the housing revenue accounts. So those are our council residents who obviously pay rent, and that's done through again a ring-fenced account there. Some other examples of council services that and what they cost. We've got £3.7 million for libraries on there, and also £22 million, I think it was, just for waste collection for the weekly refuse and recycling services. In terms of the sort of what's known as the council's net budget requirement, it's going to be something like £319 million in the next financial year. And this is a pie chart split up by the council's directorates to give you an idea of where that money is spent. I mean, there are two obviously bigger chunks of the pie than others. If you add those up, so these are for our children and young people services and our adults and health services, that's 69p in every pound that we spend is spent on those, and that's principally social care, so adult social care and children's social care. In terms of how we're funded, here's a pie chart which again adds up to the same number, 319 million. You'll see that council tax equates for just under a third of our income and resources. The rest comes to us from central government from various different funding streams. So there are particular revenue grants given to us for specific purposes, something called the RSG, which is a more general revenue support grant, and then those other two blue and orange slices of pie are all to do with the national non-domestic rates system of funding. But essentially, really, apart from the council tax, all that other funding comes to us from central government, and that's really significant, and you'll see why on this slide. So this shows basically the changes over the last 10 years to local government funding which it receives from central government. So it's produced by London Council, it's not by Newham Council, so it's independent to us, this analysis. The grey line at the bottom plots the resources available to London boroughs in real terms, and you'll see that that's decreased by nearly 30% since 2010. So this is those slices of the pie that comes from central government is reduced. It is true that some more spending, some more funding is coming through to the council for the next financial year. There is a couple of caveats to that. One, as you can probably see from this chart, that would put us back somewhere like where we were back in 2015-16. So still still over 20% less than the funding we used to receive in 2010 in real terms. And also that there are some new burdens and new asks on local government that we're going to have to pay for, not least one of which is just the increase in national insurance. So that's a tax all employers will need to pay. We're an employer, we'll have to pay that as well. So that's a new burden that we'll have to pay. There are also, more importantly, I think the impact of the new adult social care reforms, again, more costs for local government to pay. So that's why perhaps I just wanted to point out some of the intricacies of that chart. And then I come on to the 22-23 budget. So we published back in December after approval at Cabinet a draft and provisional budget paper. And for me, I just want to sort of say it does three things really. It does stick to the longer term financial strategy that was set out in the previous budgets, which Councillor Poole spoke about a little bit earlier. It does provide, again, as Councillor Poole set out, some extra investment in services targeted at real frontline services for vulnerable residents. And we are using the budget to try and meet the challenge of rising costs and also hopefully what will become the legacy, but certainly ongoing costs at the moment of the COVID pandemic. In order to meet those costs, one thing we've had to do is analyse the budget and try and achieve a bit of better value for money through making some efficiency gains. So there's £3.7 million of efficiency gains set out in that December budget report. They are not reorganisations of services. It's a lot of it, some of it's about, I'll come on to the next slide, we'll come on to those in just a moment. The other thing we have to do in order to balance the budget is an increase to council tax, actually, as I'm sure you're aware. That will go up by 1.99% and 1% for the adult social care precept, which is an element of council tax specifically ring-fenced to help finance the increased cost of adult social care. Newham, like all local authorities, is being affected by the demographic growth. So just the demographic pattern of the population, there are more older people in need of social care, and that is what this precept introduced by the government is designed to do. By comparison, that just sets out the Band D council tax charge against other East London authorities, and you'll see it's the lowest in East London. In terms of the specific charges, so the 1.99% increase and 1% increase for a Band D household equates to an extra 63 pence a week. If a household's receiving the maximum council tax reduction scheme, that's an extra 6 pence a week compared to the previous year. One other thing I'd sort of mention, if you look at the second row there, the percentage of homes. So Band D accounts for 21% of our homes. In total, 93% of the homes in Newham are Band A to Band D. There aren't an awful lot of homes in bands E to H. Here's an analysis of the efficiency gains we're seeking to make. So one thing we're very keen to do is increase the permanency of our staff. It produces better outcomes and more effective working, so using fewer agency costs. There are some manager posts that have been removed and made redundant. And then we've had a departmental efficiency drive. So things like clamping down on use of postage, making sure our income targets are correct. There's also been some real rationalisation on things like training budgets, and making sure we're only spending money where we absolutely need to. So a combination of those things has brought us £3.7 million of savings or efficiency gains, which I think are necessary in order to balance the budget to meet the costs of the services we explained previously. Here are some more specific numbers, some of which I think Councillor Poole's already explained. So £1 million to go towards families with no recourse to public funds. We've certainly seen, and I think this has been exacerbated by the pandemic, real growth in demands for children's social care. I spoke about the growth in demand for adult social care, and that's part of our longer term plan. But particularly now, we really are seeing increased costs and increased numbers of placements of children in social care. And then £1 million to go back into our temporary accommodation budgets and to ensure that we can meet demand there. The figure at the bottom is a current estimate on what we're going to need to give out to services to help them sort of stand still in what they can buy for. So the purchasing power of their budgets needs to increase to meet some of these rising costs. On the capital programme, so the budget also includes a capital strategy, and we have a wide-ranging capital programme, which we will, I think at the last count, sets out about £1.4 billion of investment over the next 10 years. But more specifically, we know that it includes £187 million on 25 projects, which are aimed at moving the council towards its net zero carbon target for 2030. So things like making sure our new builds are very environmentally friendly with passive house status, replacing some gas boilers, and something you might see more and more of on the street scene, installing more electric charging points for electric vehicles. And also we've made some more progress, and will make more progress in the near future, on just increasing our energy efficiency of the council's office and buildings. We're very keen to then start measuring the impact that we're having on our carbon footprint. And what measuring will do is enable us to then sort of set ourselves the targets, see where we are and how we close that gap, just like some of the leading cities across Europe, and what investments we need to make in order to get to where we want to be by 2030. So that was just a sort of whistle stop through, I think are some of the key elements of the budget that's being set for 22-23. In terms of what comes next, we've got a cabinet decision on the budget report on the 8th of February, and then it goes to full council approval on the 28th of February. And once that is set, you'll find the council tax statements go out in the middle of March. If you'd like to see more information and read the report, you'll find links through to it. Well, it's easily Googleable, but there is also a link on this presentation. And really importantly, I know people are posting questions into the chat, but we also have a dedicated email there. So if you didn't feel your question was addressed, please do send it in on that, or let us know your views on what we're proposing, and we will take that into account in our final budget report as well. Councillor Paul, I think I'm just going to hand back to you, and we have a couple of case studies of how the budget will affect, or how the activities of the council will affect some households.
Thank you, Andrew. That was great. One of the things what we tried to do when we put the budget together is to try and take a view and say, how would some of the elements which we've got in the budget, how would it affect people's lives? So what we do in finance is we've got a couple of profiles, and we run it through, and we say, you know, how will that affect? So, and there are a number. We just picked a couple here. Case study 1. So, you know, single parent family, typical of a few of our residents. You can see the sort of advice and support which is available to that family. Yeah, I did mention about the Our Money team based in Stratford, about making sure that people are claiming the right level of support, making sure the employment rights are correct. Obviously, during the COVID, families have benefited from the emergency support for food and energy. That's been accessed by our money area. Also, DHP, apologies for the jargon, discretionary housing payment, where people are really financially challenged. There's some additional support we can do to support them paying their rent, and we actually use those sort of tools. And also debt advice is very, very important as well. And I know, but we have, you know, got involved and supported our residents with regards to that. So I'm just trying to give you a highlight how, you know, how some of the things. On number 2, again, you know, this is the family here, and again, you know, support again, Our Money, but also one of the things, they've got young primary school children, and trying to think about what we haven't done there. Remember, if they're at primary school in Newham, they'll receive free school meals, and it will say in the slide, each free school meal is roughly worth about £500 per child. So you can see with primary age children in Newham, we do provide that support, which is quite, I think, excellent support in these times. And also, we've got some emergency support there. So we just try to look at, you know, and there's many different examples and ways to look at this, but we do try and sit down and go, okay, we've got this measure. How would that impact on individuals and families and households, and how would they get that access to that support? Okay, thank you, Andrew. Now I think you're right there. And can you move it or not? Yeah. So I think down to quick Q&A, Andrew. I've been reading some of the chat and some of the questions asked to me, and I think it might be helpful if I just run through what people have mentioned to me. Samara mentioned Ciaro, sorry if I mispronounced your name, mentioned about fly tipping. You know, what we can do about fly tipping in the borough. And obviously there's a massive program on that. Obviously, you may or may not see on social media, I mean, local newspapers, there's a campaign to tell people to stop fly tipping. We've got to be honest about it. It is residents, our neighbours, who are taking their rubbish and sticking it on the street. And we come along and clear it up. It will be easier if they stick it in the bin. Well, that's one thing. But there's an extensive campaign to do that. Another question raised in the chat is about housing repairs. I agree, we've got to get better at our housing repairs. As I know, working with Councillor Mohammed, who's the housing lead, there's a big programme to make sure we've got better systems in place. We are sending the right people to the right job, and we are taking a real big approach in how we are tackling those housing repairs. And so we're doing that. There's a question in the chat which came about, will we use the levelling up bid to pay for Newham City Farm? No, we won't. I think something, and Mark asked the question, when we will receive details of the levelling up bid. Some of you know, in October, we were successful in winning some additional government monies for some major projects in Newham, and those projects I haven't got the date in my mind, but they will be coming out shortly, and they are being worked on at the moment. Another question asked, what does the education grant is used for? Obviously, the money's been given to schools for education. That was asked there. And the other one,
Councillor, should I come in and just explain on the education grant? Is that helpful?
Yeah, of course.
The dedicated schools grant, to give it its proper title, it funds the education of pupils in the borough. So it funds pupils, and that's what it's based on. We use that. The largest share of that goes out to schools and academies in the borough. So that's distributed on a formula, largely based on how many pupils you'll have. But there are a few other bits to that which relate to things like deprivation, so that money finds its way to the schools in the manner where it needs to go. And we work very closely with the Schools Forum on setting that. Then there's part of the education grant funds early years provision. So for some, that's early years provision for 2-year-olds, but also the free hours that people receive for 3- and 4-year-olds preschool to nursery settings and nurseries within schools. And then another large chunk of money goes towards what is known as the high needs block. So that will be spent in that's probably the most interesting bit of it, really, in that some of it goes to schools to fund to fund pupils with high needs. It will fund special schools. It will fund some interventions. It will also fund a few some services that the council run themselves to assist that cohort of pupils. And then finally, there's an extremely small slice of it which we just use for administering the rest of it. But by and large, it's really focused on pupils and finds its way to schools and providers.
Okay, brilliant. A question which has come in, and we've got James Asser, who's here as a cabinet member for environment. James, I'm going to try and summarise, if I can, the questions from Alan Mayo. The amount of fly tipping in the borough is a disgrace, which can be at least partly attributed to the decision to charge residents for collection of bulky waste. Has any thought been given to cancelling these charges? The second part was about residents entitled to park a car for free. So I bet parking charges. And yeah, can you just deal with those, James? Or just like a slight overview about your area, about fly tipping? And I know this is essentially a budget feedback session for residents, but just to touch on that, James, and where people could perhaps go to find information if possible.
Yeah, on fly tipping and the bulky waste charge, the charge was originally in place. It was taken out for a year and then brought back. The simple answer is it made absolutely no difference to the levels on the street. The levels were the same before and after. The problem is not to do the bulky waste charge. the charge, we found the cost the council saw, and what we saw was also a big drop in the donations to charity. What you had was a drop in the number of people going to Jenkins Lane but using the free service instead. I think the problem you got, if you're the kind of person who dumps stuff on the street, you're not the kind of person who books in anyway. The problem we've got is a long-standing one, partially around people just putting waste on the street where they shouldn't, and we need an education program, which we're just doing now to raise that up, but also much more around enforcement and tackling that, which is, as Terry said earlier, we've launched a big campaign over the next few months. You'll see more of it ramping up, telling people not to dump, more signage, more posters. And on top of that, in terms of clearing it, what we've done now is some street busting teams that are tackling the main high streets to make sure they're cleared, and get on top of that while we make structural changes in terms of the way the street cleaning service works. So as you know, we brought, as hopefully people have seen, we brought that back in-house last year. That's now being restructured. So we're changing the way we clean the streets. We're changing the way we tackle fly tipping and dumping. We're increasing enforcement, we're increasing awareness, we're increasing education. But in terms of the bulky waste, there was really no difference. And that's the same evidence that other boroughs have found too. It doesn't really affect it, because if you're the kind of person who's prepared to dump stuff, you're just the kind of person who ignores all the rules anyway. So.
Okay, thank you, James. I'm scrolling through. There's a question from Hanny, actually, which I think, why should we pay the increase in, why should we ask residents to pay increase in council tax, which part of it includes the adult social care precept? Just simply, the adult social care precept goes directly to adult social services, and it goes to provide services and support to our most vulnerable residents. And as you can imagine, in these COVID times, and many people have health are impacted in their health, who need support from the council, that money goes directly to them. So when you look at your council tax, a large amount of that goes to my colleague, Councillor Zulfikar Ali, and that goes towards helping our most vulnerable residents who have got some support needs. Andrew, did you want to come in and add to that?
Yeah, just by way of sort of some factual information on that. So 1% on council tax equates, given the number of homes in the borough, it basically equates to 0.9 million. So just underneath £1 million is raised through a 1% on the precept there. Our estimates just through the aging, the cost of the aging population, the demographic pressures for adult social care are 3.7 million next year. So that's already sort of built into our long-term budget planning, and it is part of the solution, but not the solution to meeting the cost of the aging demographic.
So if I may, Terry,
Of course you can.
it would be remiss of us not to draw residents' attention to the fact and the reality that national government has failed and continues to fail in resolving the adult social care crisis, and is passing on the burden to local government in the context of them, in addition, having been hurt and constrained by diminishing central government grants, and they're fobbing off the cost of adult social care to local government, and that's one of the reasons why they've opened up the so-called flexibility for local authorities to add the precept, because they've made clear and haven't provided a financially sustainable solution for the long term to the crisis in adult social care, and it's really important that we emphasize that. Yeah,
really great point. And next question, really great question from Yvette, actually, and I'll read it. It's really, why only 1,000 generally affordable homes? At this rate, the next 3 generations will not be able to afford to own a house. The key answer to that is the government are simply not giving us the money to build more homes, and that is it. That is the number one. The mayor is the cabinet member responsible for regeneration, and Councillor Mohammed is the housing lead. And I'm sure if you gave the mayor and Councillor Mohammed, £100 million, they will spend it on housing tomorrow. Yeah.
Can I just nuance the response, Terry? So the 1,000 homes at social rent levels is not the totality of what we are delivering with regards to housing. In my introductory remarks, I mentioned that in total we are investing some £2 billion in housing delivery. Part of that money is going towards resourcing and financing the 1,000 homes at social rent levels. Some of that money is going towards 3 major estate area regeneration programmes, one in Custom House, one in Canning Town, and the Carpenters Estate. The Carpenters Estate alone totals some £1 billion in investment. Following the ballot that was approved by residents that were eligible to vote before Christmas, we will be over the next 10 to 15 years in a phased approach, delivering just over 2,000 homes, of which of the 3 high-rises, 2 will be retained and restored, leading to, in total, over 50% of homes on Carpenter's Estate being at social rent levels. In addition, of the £2 billion that I have referenced, a significant amount of money in coming to millions of pounds is being used to do all the remedial works across our 16,000 council stock of homes across the borough, and that's been led by Siobhan, and that's a 10-year programme as well. And we're also coupling our housing delivery with acquisitions of homes for our people, because we know that just solely focusing on building homes, it's going to take us years and years and years. We've got to do a multi-pronged approach to housing delivery to increase supply. And we've also got to make sure, and this is really important work that Siobhan is doing, providing the support and offsetting the risks and vulnerabilities that our residents face, of which 68% of our resident population live in the private rented sector. They are exposed to the vulnerabilities of a largely unregulated private rented sector. And that's the reason why we are working with Generation Rent on a tenants' rights hub, making sure residents know their rights, but we're also combining that with a better system to prevent homelessness, which no doubt Siobhan would want to contribute to in a short while.
Yeah. Siobhan, he's here. Did you want to? Thought he was here. Okay.
He's just on mute.
Siobhan, are you here? I can't see you on my screen.
Siobhan, you're on mute.
Okay, I'll come back to Siobhan in a minute. Let him get his. Just a couple of bits. People have said they've had missed collections on bins. I've just said you can, if you've got a missed collection, you can.
Sorry, Terry.
You can ring up and sort your bins out, and you can do that. That's what a house parish notice. Shabs, over to you.
Sorry, I think the host muted me. But on tackling homeless and TA, you know, for us it's a big issue in this borough, and we are determined to actually bring in more supply. And with our acquisitions program that we currently have, we are going to literally work to reduce homelessness in this borough and tackle TA and bring in additional stock. So when we're talking about additional 1,000 homes, we've got pipelines and work streams that we're going to increase that stock. So I'm determined to actually work really hard with our residents, with lead member for finance and the mayor, to actually really bring more stock online and get our numbers in TA and our housing waiting list down as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Shab. Just scrolling through the questions I've got here. There's a question in the chat, what are we doing about mental health, from Pervez. I know in the budget before last 2 years ago, there's some additional investment in children's mental health services. I know that, and obviously, and a lot of work's been done in the children's area, but obviously it's not my area of finance, but obviously if you could email me if you want a more detail, I can get an answer for you on that one.
We've got Zulfikar here.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see you, Zulfikar. I've got a split screen. Zulfikar, do you want to come in about mental health?
Apologies, I think the host has.
No problems, Ulfi.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I mean, the mental health is a very, very pertinent question, actually, because of the COVID. We have had quite a serious impact nationally and indeed locally as well. But we're working with our East London Foundation Trust to make sure that we actually provide the support to the people who need it. And even during COVID, we have had access to the services for many people. And there's a good network with the primary care and indeed the secondary care to make sure that the service continues. And there is further plans in place to make sure that we tackle these issues in the long run, because the long COVID is here as well, and that means the mental health issues will still be with us. So we are working collectively with all our partners to make sure there is a cohesive and comprehensive plan to help people. But there is this stigma about mental health. Clearly, there are various issues amongst the community where and there is an element of non-recognition of mental health issue, and that's another area that concerns us. It is an illness effectively, and that is something that we need to get that message across to the community. And I really appreciate you raising that question, because it is good that people are beginning to recognize that it is an illness, and we want to see more of those issues and more questions coming forward so that we can actually tackle those collectively from all sections of the community. Thank you, Chair.
Lovely, thank you. Another question there on EHC plans. I know when we were elected in 2018, Newham didn't do EHC plans, and there was significant investment given the following year after to begin the process to clear the backlog. I haven't got the up-to-date figure, because obviously it's not my area of concern, but there has been budget put in the EHC plan area. I haven't got the actual detailed numbers to hand, so my apologies for that. Sarah Ruiz, who's the cabinet member, has had a meeting clash, so she's not here to give you an answer. Just looking through, there's Betty O'Connell, your hands are raised. Can we unmute Betty? Amy? Just got to find you, Betty, and we'll unmute you. Here we go. Betty, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. One is regarding mental health, because over this pandemic, over the last 2.5 years, I was one of the people that had to isolate for some quite considerable amount of time. And we used to have meetings originally to do with mental health and different other aspects of long-term illness and things like that. This has not happened now in just over 2 years, but when is the borough going to be able to get back to having groups of people meet up again? Because that through the 2 years, we've kind of kept in touch through Facebook or WhatsApp, but I still want to do to come to meetings to actually, because a lot of the services some people don't know about.
Okay, Betty, I think, great question, and love to hear your voice again. I think the key thing, Betty, the last 2 years we've had COVID, so actually we've not been able to come together. And I know I've spoken to Councillor Ruiz about the use of the Custom House Library for those meetings to occur. But I think gradually, as you can see, when the restrictions are being released, then obviously we'll start, I hate using the word, getting back to normal. But that's you can appreciate the main reason why we haven't the last 2 years is because we've not been allowed to for COVID. But thank you, Betty, for your question, and I know that we'll see the next.
I have got another question.
Go on, Betty, go for it.
And it's regarding the houses that are the major flats that's been built in the borough. None of them are affordable to the people that live in the borough. Now, I know because the mayor knows me fairly well over the years, and we've got blocks of flats in Kenny Town, Silvertown Way, that residents in the area cannot afford. And we're going to have more and more people in there. We haven't got the schools, we haven't got the medical things in place, and they're not going to the people that need them.
Can I just bring in Councillor Mohammed to come back to
Yeah.
you? Is that okay? Because he's the
Yeah.
housing.
Yeah. He knows me as well.
If it's okay, Terry, if I can provide a response. Betty, you're
Okay.
absolutely right. The vagaries of local authorities, local areas, the crisis in housing has been a consequence of private developers basically extracting profit over the right to have a roof over your head that you can afford. And that's the reason why we, under this administration, have been really pushing hard to reboot municipal house building and make the investments that I've referenced previously. £2 billion of investment in council-led housing delivery acquisitions is no mean feat, and it's symbolic of a shift in approach that this council is undertaking and other councils, and we are pioneering in that. We are also in the context of applications coming to planning committee, and before they're being considered for approval, planning officers are tasked with ensuring that they achieve an optimal number of homes that are genuinely affordable, either at social rent levels or at intermediate levels of affordability, in line with the Mayor of London's direction that's been set under the local plan. So what you reference is very much a feature of what's been allowed to escalate over the last 10 to 20 years, and we are trying to turn the tide, and we've started locally. But in terms of the different phases in Canning Town and Custom House, there will be a significant proportion of those homes being delivered in Custom House that will be at social rent levels.
Okay, Shab, do you want to add to that?
No, I concur with the mayor, because like I said, I think we're really working hard, and you know, we want to co-produce our developments with residents. So in a regeneration scheme, everything we're doing is around co-production, making sure that the residents are part of that development and have a say in that development.
Okay, now we're due to finish now, but if I can add 10 minutes on to try and get through the questions, hopefully. Linda Jordan.
Hi, yeah, it's not a question. I mean, I could ask lots of questions, but I just wanted to point out that it's not true that Newham didn't do EHC plans. I don't think it's helpful to say that Newham didn't do EHC plans. The situation was that Newham had less EHC plans than most other places because there was a system of giving money to schools without the need.
I stand corrected, Linda. Apologies on my part.
And there has been a decision by the council to only allow money to go to schools with an EHC plan, which is why there's now a rapid increase. It was up to 1,300 last year, and I think the last SCN2 data showed that it was getting on for 1,700. So you've increased the number of EHC plans, but it's not true that we didn't do EHC.
Okay, I stand corrected, and thank you for the correction. Pervez, you've got a...
Hello there. My question is to our mayor, just followed by 3.7 million efficiency saving. Can you guarantee that there is no frontline services going to be cut?
Sorry, could you repeat your question?
You are proposing 3.7 million efficiency saving, departmental saving.
Yeah.
Can you guarantee that there is no frontline service will be cut?
So the efficiency savings relate to the way in which the organisation operates and ensures that we are optimising the use of every single pound that we are spending. We have no proposals in terms of reducing frontline services, if I understand your question correctly. But if you've got a specific concern in terms of a particular area, are you able to elaborate? And maybe I can pass back to Terry and Andrew to provide the specifics around the definition of efficiency savings, because I appreciate the sentiment behind the question, because no doubt you've been advised by people that you speak to that efficiency savings is a code for getting rid of staff. And I just want to assure you that frontline services, in the context of what we have prioritised under this administration, and I draw your attention back to my introductory remarks, where I made it really clear that the intention of this administration from the outset, back in May 2018, was to address those fundamental issues of inequality and poverty that for far too long in this borough had not been sufficiently addressed. And that's the reason why we are deploying an inclusive economy and community wealth building set of strategies, alongside responding to the dangers and the threats posed by the climate emergency. And then who out of any of us in this Zoom chat would have anticipated a global pandemic, that we're now familiar with, COVID-19, which has really exposed those risks and vulnerabilities as a consequence of the poverty and inequality that exists in this borough that hadn't been adequately dealt with. Terry and Andrew, or Comrade.
Andrew?
Hi, so thank you for the question. Yep, there are no cuts to frontline services in the 3.7 million efficiency savings. That they are, like I said, they're very much concentrated in the back office, or just delivering with a little bit less money, but the same service provided.
Okay, now I've got last three questions. I've got Barman, Karami, Rachel, Osei, Tegmeg.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me? Hi. I have one question. Actually, I just want to know it, because I am, as a Newham resident, I want to know what's happening to E20, which is basically East Village. Who bought this land back in 2012? Until today is not clear to us, which is what was going on in E20 as East Village. Yeah.
Barman, okay. Quickly, obviously, we're here tonight talking about our budget. E20 is a bit of land controlled by the LLDC. Yeah, so that's where we are.
Just on that question, I'm more than happy to provide you a fuller response or have a conversation with you, because basically the E20 development is managed by a development partner of what Terry referred to, a mayor of London body called the London Legacy Development Corporation. And if you've got any particular issues as a resident living there in terms of costs, because we have picked up, there's an issue with regards to the fixed estate charge, which is adding to the household costs of residents living in that locality. And we've been doing lots of advocacy on behalf of residents there. So if you just maybe private direct message me with your email address, I will engage with you outside of this meeting. Is that okay?
Yeah, lovely.
That should be great. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and the last two, I've said it before, Rachel and Camille, please.
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity. And basically, I've got just two questions. The first refers to the previous one, which the mayor answered, but I felt it was just in the it was just directed to affordable rents, people wanting to rent. My question is, how about people who would want to buy, who would live in the community, but then obviously because the house prices are so high, cannot really afford to invest or make any investments within the community? And secondly, will be on the MI permits. We know that previously, as a resident, we used to park, although we get a permit, but we used to park. However, it was secondary cars, like if you have a second car, that's when you'd have to pay. The rule came up into force, I think last year, to say we should pay a certain amount for, to park if you emit a certain CO2. As a result of that, and then as a result of the ULEX also coming into force, a lot of people ended up changing their cars, which means that the new cars that they've got are ULEX compliant. So my question is, if a car is ULEX compliant. Why should we as residents and, you know, and the working class especially, because we are being hit by all these increases, why should we still keep paying for the parking permits?
Thanks for the question. So in summary, the first question is about, what's the question about buying, you want to buy homes in the borough and what we can do about it? Is that a fair summary?
It's the different housing products
Okay.
that can be accessed. Within the housing sort of market, as it were, there are a range of products, including, for instance, housing products delivered by private developers, whereby you buy a share of it and you rent a share of it, and then over time you buy more and more of that share. Our priority in this borough under this administration and this council is to optimise the number of homes that can be afforded by our residents, given the social economic position of a vast majority of our residents. And what I mean by that is, if you compare the average salary, household salary of Newham residents compared to the London average, the gross household income in Newham is some £20,000 per annum, and the London average is 29. Obviously, these are figures pre-pandemic, but they are illustrative in a very stark way nonetheless. Our acute housing need in this borough for too many of our residents, because of our socio-economic profile, mean that we prioritise as a council social housing delivery, i.e. homes that our people can genuinely afford. But there are many housing products in the market that you can consider, and there's lots of information on the website. I'll, through Terry, if I may, invite James to address the issue of the emissions-based parking, which I understand is largely what you're referring to. I will say this as a part response, and then I'll invite James Asser. In this borough, what has become very apparent through the COVID-19 pandemic is what I mentioned previously, the risks and vulnerabilities of our resident community that have made them particularly exposed to COVID-19, given our rates of community cases and transmission in the community. We also have a profoundly high level of toxic air in this borough that is leading to some 4,500 children each year being hospitalised due to severe high levels of respiratory conditions, and also leading to some 111 people dying prematurely each year. That, combined with our commitment to climate emergency, requires us to undertake a whole series of measures, of which the emissions-based parking policy is one. And we've also got to be mindful that a majority of our residents in this borough do not own cars. The majority of our residents in this borough actually use public transport. At this juncture, I'll hand over to James Asser. And
James, can you be concise? Because our last question is going to be Carell Buxton, and I did say I'll allow 10 minutes, but we're going over that time. So can you be on point?
I won't go over the air quality and pollution stuff because the mayor has already touched on it. I'll just say we introduced largely for the reasons the mayor has talked about last year, the emissions-based parking. And one of the reasons we introduced it on an emissions-based system rather than just a flat fee, which would have been easier but wouldn't have addressed the problem, was to tackle that air quality thing. We were one of only 2 boroughs in London that didn't charge for street parking, given the situation that really wasn't sustainable over the longer term. By doing it as a structured emissions-based thing, smaller cars, for example, pay less than larger cars. The people you've talked about who will have changed and modernised their cars for the ULEZ, which is a City Hall scheme, not a Newham scheme, will have benefited from that because they'll move down into lower brackets. We also included hybrids in the very low free brackets, simply because that's where a lot of our minicab drivers are who are on low wages. So we've structured this. We also looked alongside the other boroughs around us and set our rates much lower than most of our neighbours, simply because we were taking into account the economic situation in the borough too. So we tried to find a balance on that, and people will benefit as they modernise and cars move up and change their cars. As the Mayor said, the majority of people in the borough don't own cars, and that tends to include some of the poorer people. And the highest charges tend to be for the bigger, more expensive cars with the bigger engines. So we've tried to find a balance between the things we need to do, but looking at the economic situation and providing opportunities and ways for people to reduce the costs as well. So we've tried to find that balance and to make it as fair as we can, given the system we needed.
Thank you, Jane. And last questions, Carel. Thank you for being patient, Carel. I'm sorry I didn't kick everyone to time. Over to you. You're on mute, Carel. You're on mute.
Thank you, Terry. I'll be very brief then. Yeah. I'm going to return to housing,
yeah,
surprisingly enough, because a lot of people have mentioned it. A very simple question. The amount of 2 billion has been stated. That's a phenomenal amount of money. And I'd just like to know what proportion of that money comes from the private sector. And my other question is about housing for social rents. I mean, there's a real issue for people locally, including my own children who cannot afford the social rents in the borough. Islington currently has a policy where all new development built for social rent, 50% of all new development is at social rent. So that was fought in the High Court, and Islington Council won. And I wonder if, I see Shaban Mohammed is nodding, he obviously knows about it. So can Newham adopt the same approach?
Over to Shabs, who's nodding.
Sorry, if I may, Terry, I just wanted to clarify the first part of your question. When you made reference to the 2 billion,
yeah,
you said, if I understood you correctly, of that amount, how much is private? Sorry, what did you mean by that?
Well, how much of that money comes from the private sector, or is it all from the council, Roxana?
Right, so it's all council investment.
Okay.
And Conrad can elaborate on the detail on that. And then in answer to your second question, presently on all council land that we're unlocking for housing, 50% is the set rule or guide to the council, the regeneration team, and Popolo Living, which is the council's wholly owned housing delivery company, to ensure that every site unlocked on a piece of land that we own is 50% social rent levels.
Lovely.
And then we're pursuing through planning policy an optimal amount of affordable housing, including social rent, through our negotiations with private developers. But on council land where we are developing housing, we are tasking the teams to deliver at least 50%. And you've got to appreciate that we've got to also ensure that any scheme that we develop is able to cross-subsidise the social rent element. Otherwise, we'll be exposing ourselves to more and more and more borrowing, and that's financially illiterate and risky.
Shabs, do you want to add some?
Does Conrad want to say anything about
Conrad? Shabs?
No, like I said,
okay.
I was just going to say, I agree with the mayor, and we are trying to push for more social housing in the borough. Like I said, we've been on a journey since we came into power, and we inherited one of the biggest waiting lists of any London borough, and we are working really, really hard to get that, bring more social housing online. And at the end of the day, we got to look at it also is things like our key workers as well, because at the end of the day, a lot of our key workers are living out the borough. We want to try and attract many of our key workers into the borough, keep them in borough, and make sure that we got that we got all those workers in the borough helping our residents and delivering for our residents. That includes teachers and policemen and Yeah, so that's,
Okay,
yeah.
Conrad, do you want to come on the 2 billion point before we
So
start?
just really quickly on the financing point, the Mayor's explained the council's policy of 50% social and affordable rents. So the other half of that, which you need in order to finance it, either the long-term rents for those where we hold the properties but rent them out at market levels, or the sales of those then provide the money that pays for the cost of that borrowing that builds the social housing. We don't enter into schemes of that scale, as I'm sure you can imagine, unless we've really kind of carefully assessed the viability of those, and we keep those under constant review. For example, the changes to inflation and probably interest rates that we're seeing at the moment is something that we're paying a very close eye on, because that affects the long term of these schemes. So we assess them when we enter them, and we keep our eye on them throughout the scheme to make sure they stay affordable.
Lovely.
And just one quick final point, Terry, just on that. By way of example, Carpenter's Estate is not a joint venture with a private developer. That was the intention of the previous council. We announced early on, back in November 2018, that we would not be pursuing a joint venture, and that is something that we're pursuing alone, and we're not pursuing it for profit. It is a scheme that is through the split between social rent, genuinely affordable, and then some of the housing provision that will be at market rent. That market rent housing will cross subsidise the social rent, but it will be at least 50% social rent on Carpenters.
Okay, lovely. First of all, I have let it go over by 20 minutes. Obviously, we usually have an hour. So, and what can I say? Can I thank everyone for their questions? It's been really good. And obviously in the chat, which Andrew's put on there, please do email any comments and thoughts you got into the budget consultation. Obviously, it's newham.budget@newham.gov, and that will feed into us, and I'll look at those questions. And just again, what we try to do is to give you a little summary, a thumbnail sketch of the budget. That's how big the budget document is, just to give you some context. So what we try to do is just to give you a flavour of what it is, and to give you some broad themes, and to provide assurance. But obviously, what we're doing in your name to provide assurance, how we balance in some quite challenging situations in the midst of not enough government money. And I can say a lot about the government, but I won't. And hopefully what we wanted to do is just provide that assurance for you tonight. So can I thank you tonight? Sorry to have kept you 20 minutes over time, but please do email the Newham budget consultation, and we'll take those comments in. In terms of concluding remarks, the Mayor or Andrew, are there any comments, any final comments or reflections you want to make to the residents here tonight?
I'd just like to say thanks very much for coming in and listening to me talk about local government finance. I really enjoyed that. But I would also just encourage people to use that email address and let us know your comments and thoughts. I'm sorry if we didn't get to every question this evening as well, but we'll look to try and respond to all of those if you can use that email. Thanks very much.
And Mayor, can I give you the final comments as being the Mayor?
Thank you very much. Similarly, really appreciate the range of questions. And I guess just really to leave you all with this, all of us in the council, councillors, members of the cabinet are absolutely dedicated and focused on improving the borough, making sure that the scourge of fly tipping isn't the dominant issue that makes people feel miserable about the areas and neighbourhoods that they live. And we want to ensure that we do best and do right for all of our residents, because for too long, they had been insufficiently, serviced through the council, and we are turning things. We've had the phenomenal challenge of COVID-19, and what's been inspirational, despite the challenge of the pandemic over the last couple of years, is how the community, all of us, have come together to work as one. And I think that very much is an indication of the beauty of our borough and our communities and our people, and very much looking forward to continue in the conversations on this and many other matters, but very much appreciate the time that you've given us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. And please do use the email to feed in your comments, because me and Andrew and the mayor and everyone, we will read those comments, and you know, it's useful feedback for us. But can I thank everyone tonight, and can I bid you good fortune tonight? Thank you, everyone.